am Hannah Fry, the badass, and today I'm asking the question, is life really that complex? Now, I've only got about 9 minutes to try and provide you with an answer. So what I've done is split this neatly into 2 parts. Part 1, yes, and later on, part 2, no. Or, to be more accurate, no. Okay, so first of all, let me try and define what I mean by complex. Now, I could give you a host of formal definitions, but in the simplest terms, any problem in complexity is something that Einstein and his peers can't do. So let's imagine, if the clicker works, there we go, Einstein's playing a game of snooker. Now, he's a clever chap, so he knows that when he hits the cue ball, he could write you an equation and tell you exactly where the red ball is going to hit the sides, how fast it's going and where it's going to end up. Now, if you scale these snooker balls up to the size of a solar system, Einstein can still help you. Sure, the physics changes, but if you wanted to know about the path of the Earth around the Sun, Einstein could write you an equation telling you exactly where both objects are at any point in time. Now, with a surprising increase in difficulty, Einstein could include the moon in his calculations. But as you add more and more planets, Mars and Jupiter say, the problem gets too tough for Einstein to solve with a pen and paper. Now, strangely, if instead of having a handful of planets, you had millions of objects, or even billions, the problem actually becomes much simpler, and Einstein's back in the game. So let me explain what I mean by this, by scaling these objects back down to a molecular level. Now, if you wanted to trace the erratic path of an individual air molecule, you'd have absolutely no hope. But when you have millions of air molecules all together, they start to act in a way which is quantifiable, predictable, and well-behaved. And thank goodness air is well-behaved, because if it wasn't, planes would fall out of the sky. Now, on an even bigger scale, across the whole of the world, the idea is exactly the same with all of these air molecules. It's true that you can't take an individual rain droplet and say where it's come from or where it's going to end up, but you can say with pretty good certainty whether it's going to be cloudy tomorrow. So that's it. In Einstein's time, this is how far science had got. We could do really small problems with a few objects, with simple interactions, or we could do huge problems with millions of objects and simple interactions. But what about everything in the middle? Well, just 7 years before Einstein's death, an American scientist called Warren Weaver made exactly this point. He said that scientific methodology has gone from one extreme to another, leaving out an untouched great middle region. Now, this middle region is where complexity science lies, and this is what I mean by complex. Now, unfortunately, almost every single problem you can think of to do with human behaviour lies in this middle region. Einstein's got absolutely no idea how to model the movement of a crowd. There are too many people to look at them all individually and too few to treat them as a gas. Similarly, people are prone to annoying things like decisions and not wanting to walk into each other, which makes the problem all the more complicated. Now, Einstein also couldn't tell you when the next stock market crash is going to be. Einstein couldn't tell you how to improve unemployment. Einstein can't even tell you when the next iPhone is going to be a hit or a flop. So to conclude part 1, we're completely screwed. We've got no tools to deal with this, and life is way too complex. But maybe there's hope, because in the last few years, we've begun to see the beginnings of a new area of science, using mathematics to model our social systems. And I'm not just talking here about statistics and computer simulations. I'm talking about writing down equations about our society that will help us understand what's going on in the same way as with the snooker balls or the weather prediction. And this has come about because people have begun to realise that we can use and exploit analogies between our human systems and those of the physical world around us. Now, to give you an example, the incredibly complex problem of migration across Europe. Actually, as it turns out, when you view all of the people together, collectively they behave as though they're following the laws of gravity. Now, but instead here of planets being attracted to one another, it's people who are attracted to areas with better job opportunities, higher pay, better quality of life, and lower unemployment. And in the same way as people are more likely to go for opportunities close to where they live already, London to Kent, for example, as opposed to London to Melbourne, the gravitational effect of planets far away is felt much less. So to give you another example, in 2008, a group in UCLA were looking into the patterns of burglary hotspots in a city. Now, one thing about burglaries is this idea of repeat victimization. So if you have a group of burglars who manage to successfully rob an area, what they'll do is they'll tend to return to that area and carry on burgling it. So they learn, the layout of the houses, the escape routes, and the local security measures that are in place. And this will continue to happen until local residents and police ramp up the security, at which point the burglars will move off elsewhere. And it's that balance between burglars and security which create these dynamic hotspots of the city. Now, as it turns out, this is exactly the same process as how a leopard gets its spots, except in the leopard example, it's not burglars and security, it's a chemical process that creates these patterns in something called morphogenesis. Now, we actually know an awful lot about the morphogenesis of leopard spots, and maybe we can use this to try and spot some of the warning signs with burglaries, and perhaps also to create better crime strategies to prevent crime. And there's a group here at UCL who are working with the West Midlands Police right now on this very question. Now, I could give you plenty of examples like this, but I wanted to leave you with one from my own research on the London riots. Now, you probably don't need me to tell you about the events of last summer, where London and the UK saw the worst sustained period of violent looting and arson for over 20 years. And it's understandable that as a society we want to try and understand exactly what caused these riots, but also perhaps to equip our police with better strategies to lead to a swifter resolution in the future. Now, I don't want to upset the sociologists here, so I absolutely cannot talk about the individual motivations for a rioter. But when you look at the rioters all together, mathematically you can separate it into a three-stage process and draw analogies accordingly. So, step one, let's say you've got a group of friends. None of them are involved in the riots, but one of them walks past a Foot Locker, which is being raided, and goes in and bags himself a new pair of trainers. Now, he texts one of his friends and says, come on down to the riots. So his friend joins him, and then the two of them text more of their friends, who join them, and text more of their friends, and more, and so it continues. Now, this process is identical to the way that a virus spreads through a population. If you think about the bird flu epidemic of a couple of years ago, the more people that were infected, the more people that got infected, and the faster the virus spread before the authorities managed to get a handle on events. And it's exactly the same process here. So, okay, let's say you've got a rioter, he's decided he's going to riot. The next thing he has to do is pick a riot site. Now, what you should know about rioters is that, clicker's gone, there we go. What you should know about rioters is that they're not really prepared to travel that far from where they live unless it's a really juicy riot site. So you can see that here from this graph, with an awful lot of rioters having travelled less than a kilometre to the site that they went to. Now, this pattern is seen in consumer models of retail spending, i.e. where we choose to go shopping. So, of course, people like to go to local shops, but you'd be prepared to go a little bit further if it was a really good retail site. And this analogy actually was already picked up by some of the papers, with some tabloid press calling the events shopping with violence, which probably sums it up in terms of our research. I'm going backwards. There we go, step 3. Okay, so finally, the rioter's at his site, and now it's an he wants to avoid getting caught by the police. Now, the rioters will avoid the police at all times, but there is some safety in numbers. And on the flip side, the police, with their limited resources, are trying to protect as much of the city as possible, arrest rioters wherever possible, and to create a deterrent effect. There we go. And actually, as it turns out, this mechanism between the two species, so to speak, of rioters and police is identical to predators and prey in the wild. So if you can imagine rabbits and foxes, rabbits are trying to avoid foxes at all costs, while foxes are patrolling the space trying to look for rabbits. Now, we actually know an awful lot about the dynamics of predators and prey. We also know a lot about the consumer spending flows, and we know a lot about how viruses spread through a population. So if you take these three analogies together and exploit them, you can come up with a mathematical model of what actually happened that's capable of replicating the general patterns of the riots themselves. Now, once we've got this, we can almost use this as a petri dish and start having conversations about which areas of the city were more susceptible than others, and what police tactics could be used if this were ever to happen again in future. Now, even 20 years ago, modelling of this sort was completely unheard of, but I think that these analogies is an incredibly important tool in tackling problems with our society and perhaps ultimately improving our society overall. So to conclude, life is complex, but perhaps understanding it need not necessarily be that complicated. Thank you.
Millions of people in 50 countries took to the streets to protest an outright giant Monsanto. Activists accused the Missouri-based company of monopolistic business practices and called for the labeling of genetically modified foods. Monsanto controls 90% of the national soybean market, and some have suggested that GMOs like those made by the biotech conglomerate have led to a variety of health problems around the globe. In this age of food monopolization, the example of Monsanto is a scary one. Thankfully, there are alternatives. Just a few hundred miles from the nation's capital, in West Virginia, the market for locally grown organic food is booming. The Mountain States experiment in small-scale agriculture was so successful that some officials are now saying this could become a model for the rest of the operation and even the rest of the country. For more on this, I'm joined now from West Virginia by Anthony Blocker-Benso, certified organic produce farmer and author of Healthy Food Systems, a 250 billion value chains. Anthony, welcome to the show. I understand you're in Virginia, not West Virginia. Right?
That's right, Belmore, in the southwestern part of Virginia, which is just west of it.
Okay. And one of the Appalachian businesses that are traditionally in the heart of Appalachia. Okay. So, what is
you know, in small rural communities, the sense 20 years ago, 15 years ago, was that farmers couldn't get a break. There was no places that they faced, whether they were raising beef cattle or dairy or fruits and vegetables. And so some of us came together in Southwest communities, Tennessee, and Missouri, West Virginia, and thought, well, if we work together and pool the produce, the meats, the eggs from into one place, maybe we can gain access to some larger markets. Maybe we can start selling to supermarkets, colleges, universities, public schools, things like that. And so we started that back in the late 90s, and it's grown quite a bit since then in Southwest Virginia, and just more recently, in the last 5-6 years, it's spilled over to West Virginia. Now there's folks in Kentucky doing this. It's quite exciting because basically it's allowing very small farmers who used to grow tobacco to raise organic produce, green organics, best vegetables, healthy foods, raised in an environmentally sustainable way, and they can make a profit doing that by working together.
That's absolutely marvelous. I understand that the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Appalachian Regional Commission are now participating in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting because 20 years ago, some of us got to do a spitting in the wind. Cooperative Extension, the land grant universities, USDA, didn't give a whole lot of time or attention to the idea of local farmers selling to local people. That was a radical notion for some strange reason. So we started working on building farmers markets, we started working on aggregation. A few years later, we started bringing EBT to farmers markets. And what's terrific now is that statutory, the land grants like Virginia Tech and University of Tennessee and West Virginia University and USDA are really on board with this now, mostly. Now, there's still a lot of support in USDA for Monsanto, but there's another whole segment of USDA that is really quite supportive of the local food movement, small farmers, something like that, farmers. So USDA is a little bit torn about this issue right now. They're really excited that they've at least progressed over they are now willing to support local farmers, raising good food for ordinary folks.
We have less time. I can see where something like this would be an incredible value in an area that's economically distressed, like much of Appalachia is. On the other hand, it's equally applicable, isn't it, to any part of the United States?
Absolutely. Study after study shows that you get more job creation per dollar of sales than transactions that are kind of close to home. In other words, when a local farmer sells to a local person at a farmer's market or a local grocer, you get, not only do they do better, but you get more net jobs. You get more income staying in the community. That's not only true in West Virginia, Southwest Virginia, East Coast. That's true in places like Iowa, in the Blood Map, where right now in Iowa they import 90% of their food, even though they're the heart of our agricultural community. So we're excited to see that this model isn't just for Appalachia. It really can work all over the nation.
It is absolutely marvelous. Anthony Flaccavento, thank you so much for the great work you're doing and for sharing your story with us tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.
And what I saw from at the top of the stairs was a man right here around the corner with his arm like this and a gun pointing up at me. All I could see was a black hat and a black jacket, and that's all I could see, in the gun. And I stood there thinking that this was the serial killer, and he's yelling at me, "Come down now, ma'am, come down right now." They came with the director of milk control, the assistant director, and our inspector, and they all came and pretended they were just going to do an inspection, and then they did a seizure. They showed up at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard, and they had 42 armed federal agents and USDA officials, and they cleared out our entire barn. They took the sheep that we brought from Belgium and the Netherlands. They even took the sheep that I have brought over from New Zealand, and they took them out to Iowa and killed them for a disease that doesn't exist to this day.
There are two competing food systems in America. First, you have the industrial system, factory, farms, and agribusiness. Then, there's the local system, consisting of small, sustainable farms and artisanal producers. Sadly, most food production laws are designed to support the industrial operations. And the current U.S. agricultural policies could potentially destroy our local food system. I'm Kristen Canty, Mom of 4. The reason I set out to make this film is because when one of my sons was 4 years old, he was a very sick child with allergies and asthma. Conventional medicine wasn't helping him, so I did some research and found out raw milk could be a remedy. I gave my son raw milk, and his allergies completely disappeared. I had to go directly to a small farm to get our raw milk. And I started buying grass-fed meats, eggs, vegetables, and fruits from a number of small local farms. As I got to know these farmers, they told me they were encountering a variety of legal problems from both the state and federal authorities. I quickly realized that my ability to buy the healthy foods I want could be in jeopardy. The industrial food system is growing and becoming more powerful. But the small, independent food system is in danger of vanishing.
Every time there is a major shakeup in the food system, local food takes a hit. And so now we have bills winning their way through Congress, for example, that would give the Food and Drug Administration the right to conduct warrantless searches on farms to find out if anything is being done that is not science-based. Well, science-based, you know what science-based is? Science-based is petroleum-based fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, antibiotics, irradiation, cloning. That's all science-based.
You know, food safety has been hitting the headlines a huge amount. And I think most people who look at it agree that there are huge food safety problems with our mainstream system. You know, it's wrong when people die from eating peanut butter. That shouldn't happen. And it happens because there are huge flaws in the mainstream food safety system. The problem is right now that Congress has sort of taken this attitude of we've got to do something about food safety, and they're out to regulate everything and everyone to the tiniest detail. And so instead of focusing on the real problems, instead of directing FDA to really enforce, to really regulate and inspect these huge facilities, which is where all of the major food